Hey, Frank.
I told the diner that I had pneumonia. You sure it's okay if I stay here?
Yeah. I want to show you something. So what do you think?
Cartwheels.
Well, you see what I'm getting at here.
No.
Batman had Robin. The original Human Torch had Toro. The Flash had Kid Flash. I could be your kid's sidekick.
How old are you?
Well, I'm 22, you know? But compared to you, I'm I'm a kid, right?
I guess.
Right. Now, look, the most important thing, obviously, is the name. All right? Now, you gotta think of it like how it sounds with the Crimson Bolt, all right? So, okay. The Crimson Bolt and Bolt Girl. The Crimson Bolt and Kid Crimson. The Crimson Bolt and the Creeping Bam.
What's a creeping bam?
What's a Toro?
Welcome to the Superhero Cinephiles podcast. I'm your host, Perry Constantine. Welcoming a new guest today and a fellow podcaster, and that's Amit Srivastava. How you doing today, Amit?
Hey, good mate. How are you?
I'm doing good. So before we get started with the movie, first thing is I like the especially new guests for the audience to get to know them a little bit. So why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Amit. We have a podcast as well, so along those sort of similar lines, movie podcast. Not necessarily superheroes, but sort of just the whole gamut of sort of movies. Chuck in a bit of superhero stuff, some sort of new contemporary stuff, some older stuff, some of our old favorites, and yeah, some international stuff as well. So we're pretty new. So we're trying to figure out what sort of space we would be sort of all like. It's myself, my mate Dennis, and my mate Sunny. So we just sort of jump on a weekly basis and chat movies. So it's been about 4 months now, and we've just had a hell of a time with it. So looking forward to do more of it.
And what's the name of the podcast?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. The name of the podcast is D54.
D54.
So you can find that, on whatever podcast player, as they say. Spotify, Apple.
Curious, where did you guys get that name from?
So my friend Dennis. So I think we had another name before, and that name was taken on. I think it was taken on Spotify or whatever it was. So then he had this name. He had these numbers. He had this number 54 and this letter D following him around. It's kind of weird. He sort of had this combination of D54, and we're just like, all right, well, that sounds cool. It's kind of mysterious. It's probably not going to be taken. So we did that, and then I think, we just sort of ran with it. We sort of wanted to have a name that's kind of loose-ended, so it's not like, movie podcast or something like that. In case we wanted to sort of venture into something else, like D54, I don't know, history or something like that. Because sort of off-branded. So having a name that's quite open-ended, let's just sort of do that. But it's pretty easy to find. It's short, it's D54 is as short as you can get to type into something. So that's that. But yeah, it's an interesting name.
Yeah, I had that experience when I was thinking of a name for this show, because I think I wanted to go with like the superhero movie podcast or something, and it was taken. And I think that podcast actually isn't even active anymore. So, but then I chose this name instead. So why don't we talk about superhero movies and all that. So what's kind of your history with superhero movies? How did you get interested in them or in superheroes in general, anything like that?
Oh, that's taking me back. I wasn't a big comic guy growing up, so it wasn't a comic introduction. It was more probably just through TV cartoons, I would say, actually, to begin with at the start. So the old X-Men series, the old one, and then the ones that had to follow up on those ones, like Spider-Man, Iron Man, all the cartoons that used to come out. And then in the early, I guess late 90s, early 2000s, I think X-Men was a series that really gripped me in general, like that old Hugh Jackman series. Basically, they were the ones that really got me. And I used to check on Batman every now and then, Superman, but I always liked sort of the Marvel stuff a bit more. To follow that along, and then I started to get an appetite of just like enjoying superhero and superhero like movies. I guess I don't know if you'd classify this is a superhero movie in a way, but this sort of particular kind of movie also interested me like that. The moral questions it sort of asks. I sort of like that part of it as well, because X-Men was all about, the mutants and how we treat them, and it's kind of a metaphor for the Cold War and stuff like that. So I saw sort of how they sort of combined personal and I guess personal issues with social issues, and that became more and more apparent. And I like that portrayal of society and stuff like that. So I was like, okay, cool. So when I was younger, it's more about it's cool to dress up like superhero and see this cool stuff. But later on, it became like, all right, these are actually some pretty cool concepts.
I think I'm pretty sure we're about the same age, and I think most people in our generation came into it the same way. Like I came in through X-Men and Batman the Animated Series, and I think most people of our generation probably got into superheroes in much the same way, because that was what we had growing up. We were every Saturday morning or whatever, you'd have the X-Men and all that stuff.
Exactly right. Yeah. It was exactly that. I think just wake up and watch cartoons and just see X-Men. It'd be like we are most likely the same age. So it wouldn't be like, oh yeah, check on Netflix and binge through a whole series.
Right.
It'd literally be like, this is Saturday, I'm watching this, and
wake up at like 6 or 7 o'clock on a Saturday, and running down to the TV, and parents are still asleep and all that.
Pretty much. Yeah. Check it out and be like, whoa, that was amazing, and then wait a whole week to watch the next one.
And then always I remember having to record whenever something was going on a Saturday. It's like, oh shit, I got to make sure I record everything. So it's like I had to record the whole morning block.
Speaking of that, I remember that's taking me back a bit. Like I used to when I used to go to school, I used to record this is not really, it is kind of superhero, but I used to record Dragon Ball Z in the morning because it was too early for me to wake up and watch because I had school. So I'd record it, but then some days I'd wake up early enough to watch it still. So I'd do this thing where I'd record it, I'd watch it in the morning, I'd come home and watch it again in the afternoon. So I've always loved this sort of genre. And
I remember when
it's taking me back.
When I was a kid, Dragon Ball Z, it was only on Saturday mornings, but it was only on at like 6 o'clock in the morning. So I had to get up earlier than the regular cartoon block to watch it. Another thing I've started doing now is kind of talking about what kind of stuff you're into, like media wise, like movies or TVs or comic books or anything. What are you reading? What are you watching? What are you playing right now that's kind of got your interest?
So right now, so it is mostly just stuff that's preparing me for my podcast mostly. So, but that's been good because I got to look at stuff like some sort of international stuff. Some movies are like some of my friends Dennis's his favorite movies has gotten me into some of his stuff, which he knows. Other than that, I listen to a lot of sort of history stuff as well. So I like my history. I've started getting into comic books, which is pretty funny. Kind of feels weird for a guy in his mid-30s to sort of pick up a comic book, but
hey, it's never too late.
yeah, exactly. I think it was actually to my podcast because it was my mate Sonny. I think for that Thor movie, he's like, I'm gonna read the comic books, and I was like, all right, cool. And he started getting into it, and he told me how amazing the comics were in that. And obviously, I was not a fan of that movie. I don't know what you thought about that one.
Oh, you talking about Love and Thunder?
Yeah.
I enjoyed it. It wasn't as good as Ragnarok, but I still thought it was fun.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No, I really didn't like it. So I was on the other end. I think I disliked it even more because after Sonny had told me about how good the comic book series was and how complex that the God Butcher character was, I was like, oh wow, okay. So these guys really did a disservice here by making this really short. And sort of not expanding his whole profile because it was crazy. And I was like, wow, this sounds really good. And my mate and Dennis was a comic book fan, like, growing up. So he had all these references and everything like that. So I was like, all right, cool. Let me give it a little try. So I've just been getting into some comic books, which has been pretty interesting, pretty fun. It's nice to sort of explore these worlds in a different way. And it's a different medium. Like I used to, I still do read quite a bit, but comics is just a whole different way of seeing things. So these big worlds coming together and everything.
So since you mentioned gore, I'm guessing that you're looking at the Jason Aaron Thor run. Any other comic book stuff that has drawn your interest?
So because I really was just like, how can I get into this in the most easiest way? Because when I was like looking at it, I'm like, okay, so there's this character here, and I want to read a comic about him, and I look up comic about him, and I see like comics spanning from like Black Panther. It'd be like from the 60s to like now. Where do I even start with this? So there's a lot of sort of education and learning around that side of things.
Yeah.
So I'm I'm just sort of like right now because I'm still sticking to Marvel just because it's close to home. I do want to sort of expand beyond that to sort of understand storytelling beyond just sort of what Marvel have done. But for now, like I'll sort of look at a character and I'll try and just go through their profile a little bit. So I think I started to watch the She-Hulk show. So I read the comic books upon that one because I was like, let me see what it's about. And I really enjoyed that She-Hulk comic. So I'll just sort of read that. I think it's the Marvelous She-Hulk or something like that. Which is pretty cool. It's pretty funny. It's very, very fourth wall, which I didn't expect, which is cool. So that's how I'm doing it right now. But really, I don't have any sort of structure because the challenge I have is like, I'm like, well, I want to read about like I said, I want to read about Daredevil. I want to read about Black Panther. I want to read about, Black Widow. I want to read about all these characters. How do I even start with and we don't get the time to do all of this?
Yeah.
So I'm just like, let me just pick one, read it a little bit, and then move on. And then don't get so attached to the entire sort of, saga. Once I find who I really like and the story I really resonate with, go deep into that character. Because
it can be tough with Marvel because they do have the continuity stretching back decades, and they've had so many different titles being canceled, titles being relaunched, titles being rebooted, and so it can be a little bit confusing to try to make your way through it, especially because they're not always it's not always clear just from like especially if you're going through the graphic novels, just like what order they all come in. So it can be a little challenging. I know that.
And I find it like when you're there sometimes, like you just have a characters pop up and you're just like, who the heck is this?
Yeah.
And you kind of luckily because I know a little bit about Marvel, like I at least associate to be like, oh yeah, cool. Like, I've heard of this character, or I've seen this character somewhere else. But otherwise, if I'm just reading it straight up, I'm like, what the hell? What? Like in every issue, there's a new character coming up, and there's not much storytelling on that character itself. It's kind of like, want to learn more? Go look at that comic. So
yeah, that was a big way, especially in the older days, how they would get people interested in these other titles and these other characters. They'd have them pop up in other books like that. And if you're the DC stuff is, I think maybe. Because DC has a lot of stuff that's out of continuity as well. So it might be easier to follow some stuff like that. But at the same time, they've also got their own continuity, which can be kind of confusing because they've had like different reboots and stuff throughout time.
It's just interesting world. But it's
if you check out
visual style is cool.
The Reddits, there are Reddit forums for Marvel Comics and DC Comics, and a lot of them, I'm pretty sure they both have like wikis, like start here guides or something like that, or you can post in there saying like, I'm interested in so and so character, and people will give you some recommendations. So those are good resources as well. You might want to check out.
Yeah, no, I might do that because like for instance, when the movie comes out, like the next Black Panther movie comes out, I want to at least know a little bit about sort of how this all connects, and because I find like it's quite different. Like the MCU is quite different to the comic book world altogether. So it's not like I have to. It's not necessary to read it, but sometimes I think like the comic books tell stories a little bit better in some ways. At least what I'm telling you, at least from the She-Hulk series, it's doing a really good job of telling this, exploring this character. In a different way than
one of the things I like about Marvel is that it does, because the comic characters have gone through so many changes, and we're going back decades. What the MCU does really well is I think it kind of distills that kind of purest essence of the character into one thing. It makes it work for that. Like, Robert Downey Jr.'s Iron Man is different in a lot of ways from just like regular demeanor, regular personality from the Tony Stark in the comics, but it does have that same kind of essence, right? That's kind of like the purest essence of Tony Stark is just distilled in that. Same thing with Chris Evans as Captain America, right? That's just kind of like the purest essence of Cap, but it's also got, Evans' interpretation of it and Downey's interpretation of it, adding a little bit of an extra spin to it.
Yeah, definitely. It's it's not a one-to-one relationship, I guess.
Right.
They have a lot of creativity from the studio, from the actors, all that sort of involved.
Yeah.
So it's been a good journey. I would if anyone's listening and wants to sort of get into comics, I'd definitely recommend it because it is a little apprehensive to be like, man, I'm like a grown-ass man walking into a comic store.
Well, if you're worried about doing that, you can also just go on get the digital comics too.
Correct. Yeah, I've done a bit of that as well with this iPad, but just reading it on that. But yeah, it's nice reading both, digital version and actual physical copy as well. So, but yeah, man, they're pretty expensive, like far out. Like luckily, like, so I just go to someone else recommended me to go to a just go to the local library and borrow books. So I was like, this is perfect because yeah, especially at the start when you don't really know what you know want to read. Like, do I want to invest like $70 into a comic book that I don't even know if I'm even into or not? I'll just go to the library and pick up a couple and just read them and return them when I can.
Yeah. And I do all digital now because I just I've told the story before, but when my parents downsized a few years ago, like all my comics were still at their place, so I had to like get rid of them all because no way could I ship them all back to Japan. And homes here aren't very big, and so like I mean, if I showed you a camera around this room, you'd see just how cluttered my office is right now. So there's no space for physical books. Like the only physical books I have anymore are textbooks for my classes. Everything else is just I'm all digital now because of that. But one of the nice things is that Comixology, now Amazon, is they have tons of sales on these stuff. So like it's like you were talking about She-Hulk. They just finished a She-Hulk sale, and it was like you could get a lot of the books, and I'm talking the graphic novels, which have like 4 to 6 issues in each volume, were like $2-3 a pop. So
wow.
Yeah, so that's one. And they also have the Comixology Unlimited program, which is a subscription service. It's like $7 to $10 a month. And then there's a lot of like Marvel stuff, a lot of DC stuff that you can read for free through that as part of that subscription program. And then there's also Marvel has their Marvel Unlimited program. DC has their DC Universe app, I think it's called. Some issues with those, but those are also subscription services that are pretty cheap that gives you a chance to kind of explore a bunch of different things. So those are some other options too if you're interested in the digital side of things.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I've seen the Marvel Unlimited one. That's sort of one I've gone for references. Yeah, there's some issues with that. But I got like an iPad, which still works really well. The iPad Air, I think Generation 1. It's not compatible with the app.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm not going to buy a new iPad when this one's still working just for that.
I had the same issue. Mine was a Generation 2, and it was starting to show its age recently, especially because the only things I'd use it for is like I'd use it like for streaming stuff, like when I'm like doing stuff around the kitchen or something like that. Like I'd have the iPad open, I'd be streaming stuff, and I'd use it for comics, and that was it. And I wouldn't use it for anything else. But the streaming services now are basically all kaput on it, and so it was just the comics, and then Comixology updated their app, and that killed it pretty much.
No!
But I did get so I've replaced it with the Kindle Fire Plus. Because for Prime Day, it was on sale for like $50 or something like that. So if you're just using it for like comics or something like that, the Kindle is a really good one to use. It's it's a low cost tablet.
So the Kindle, so I've got an old Kindle. It's just black and white. Is it the same kind of thing? Or is
no, that's a Kindle e-reader. That's like you can get comics on that, but they're not going to be in color. Like if you want the full comics experience, it's really good to get the regular one. And I don't think like the apps and stuff like that, like Marvel Unlimited, DC, they won't work on that anyway.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read it on this black and white feed.
No.
When I'm seeing the book and it's looking with amazing graphics and stuff like that, it's like, it's going to be kind of crap.
I mean, if you're reading a black and white comic, if you're reading like manga or something like that, it should be fine. But if you want to read like the color comics, you really want to get the full effect, you really got to go with a regular backlit tablet.
Yeah.
But anyway,
tips, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's anything I can do to help more people get into comics, because it's an industry that always needs more readers. So I'm always happy to help with that. But anyway, today we are talking about 2010 Super, which was probably James Gunn's first superhero movie. And this was, pre-Guardians of the Galaxy James Gunn. This is when he was still doing like R-rated horror movies and that kind of stuff. And I had heard of this movie over the years, and it was sitting on my Hulu list for like years. It was sitting in there, my watch list. And then sure enough, I canceled Hulu like about a year ago, and then you come on and ask it to be on the show to talk about it. So then I got to figure out a way to track it down without resubscribing to Hulu. But anyway, what was your history with this film? When did you first get introduced to it?
Oh man, I had seen this, probably around about when it came out, I think. obviously I didn't see it in the cinema or anything like that. So probably when it came out to DVD or whatever it was,
Mhm.
sort of found out a way to watch it then. But I couldn't really remember it all that well. But I do remember it was a superhero movie, and I had just I was looking at sort of these directors and their origins to superhero movies because I'd recently on a podcast we recently did Darkman by Sam Raimi,
Oh
and
yeah.
that was sort of his origins.
Mhm.
Yes, I think it was to this before he started the whole Spider-Verse,
Right.
the whole Spider-Man universe.
I mean, it
and
was
then
his
Doctor Strange.
his first superhero stuff, but obviously he had done the Evil Dead stuff before that.
Yeah. He done no. He's being pretty accomplished. I guess I don't know what to call it, indie.
Yeah,
I guess
definitely.
very
Very indie, very kind of low budget. That was kind of his wheelhouse.
That was his jam. But yeah, so I wanted to see, James Gunn's now become, one of the bigger superhero directors there are now, especially with his Guardians of Galaxy series and all that. And I really enjoy those as well. So I was like,
Peacemaker, which we covered that, did an
course.
episode on that recently too.
Yeah, Peacemaker, and also the other one, right? He did the Suicide
the Suicide Squad, yeah.
Yeah, so it's starting to get a name for all this stuff. So I was like, okay, let me revisit this because I literally I couldn't remember much of it until I started seeing Rainn Wilson in the suit and some of the stuff, and some of the memories triggered back, but I couldn't remember the story much. So I was like, okay, let me give this another go and see how we sort of run with this, on sort of second watch. So that's kind of my history tour. It wasn't too deep, but I thought it'd be interesting to do because I do like that genre of movies where it's kind of like superhero but they have no powers. So definitely it did remind me of a few other movies which we can touch on as well, which are similar in their kind of nature.
Right. Well, I think the biggest comparison would obviously be Kick-Ass, which this got a lot of comparisons to at the time because Kick-Ass came out, I think, about the same year. Yeah, the same year Kick-Ass came out. And the comic had come out before that, obviously. And it's funny because James Gunn and Mark Millar, who created the Kick-Ass comic, are actually friends in real life. So when James Gunn was getting all this criticism for ripping off Kick-Ass, Mark Millar actually had to come out and defending it. And he's like, look, it's he was doing this stuff when I was doing the comic at the same time. Like we were doing these basically simultaneously.
That's pretty interesting. I remember reading that. That's crazy.
And Gunn's response, I think, was pretty good because he says it sucks on the one hand, and then on the other hand, who gives a shit? There are 4,000 bank heist movies. We can have 5 superheroes without powers movies.
Yeah, that's a great response. It's not a movie that it's still not that popular to have this kind of movie. The superhero with that powers kind of like I think Kick-Ass was one. My mind didn't go to that straight away. It went to ones before there. So the ones I had watched that was similar to this was I think you probably would have covered them as well. Blank Man with
Blank Man, yeah, I remember that. I have not covered that, but yeah, I do remember that one.
Yeah, Blank Man and I think Mystery Man was the other one. That was kind of similar too. With Ben Stiller.
A little bit, yeah. Mystery Men was a little bit more fantastical because it was set in a world with superheroes and supervillains,
Correct.
But then you had these guys who were just basically the losers of the superhero crowd. Whereas this one and Kick-Ass and Blank Man, they were very much in that, the kind of real world superhero phenomenon. Like you see, like what's his name? Phoenix Jones and all those types of guys who walk around in costume and most of them just do like community service, but some of them actually cause some controversy because they're trying to be actual vigilantes. But yeah, this is very much this and Kick-Ass. And I think if I'm not mistaken, Kick-Ass was also kind of inspired by that. Mark Millar was inspired by that kind of like real world superhero phenomena when he started writing that book.
Yeah. So the movies that came to mind. But yeah, it's interesting. Because it's just I guess when you're watching this, you sort of take a different approach. You're not expecting, I guess at least I wasn't expecting much like super special effects or super CGI or any of that stuff. You wonder what they're actually going to explore with this. And obviously, I think a big draw for me was this Rainn Wilson because I definitely back then he was sort of Dwight Schrute, and he kind of is Dwight Schrute in this, to be honest. He's sort of playing a version of himself, which I do enjoy. I did enjoy that persona, but it made me think about just him and sort of his career and how it sort of panned out. See, I'm
I've only watched like a handful of episodes of The Office. It's one of
Right.
those shows that I just could not get into in the same way that other people do. So I have not really seen Rainn Wilson in a lot of stuff. I do, obviously I know him, but for me, he wasn't the big draw. I was more curious about this because of James Gunn, and then also, you know, reading up on it beforehand, finding out that Nathan Fillion's in it too. That also caught my interest as well. Being a Firefly fan from way back.
No, the cast is good. You know, Elliot Page, who I thought was fantastic in this, and you know, Kevin Bacon also filled out sort of the roster, and Liv Tyler, I think it is.
Liv Tyler, yeah.
Pretty loaded cast if you just think about it. So
in fact, I think this is probably the only, other than Incredible Hulk, this was like the only other superhero film Liv Tyler has done. So
yeah, she goes in that. Yeah,
she goes from being in the MCU to being in this, whereas everyone else seems to have gone in the opposite direction, right? Greg Henry, Michael Rooker, Linda Cardellini, they've all gone on to Sean Gunn, they've all gone on to be in the MCU. Stephen G, he ended up being in the DC stuff. He was in the Suicide Squad and
that's right.
Peacemaker, and then Kevin Bacon, of course, in the X-Men movies.
The X-Men stuff. Yep. And he's a reference in Guardians of the Galaxy. So yeah, so it's pretty, you know, I guess, yeah, so it was I guess even the action and stuff like that, I was wondering how would it play out, like, you know, with all that. Because there are a few comparisons, and to be honest, like, you know, Black Man was pretty wacky movie. The action was not much there. I think there was like maybe one scene where he does something, and the rest is just, I think it's Damon Wayans just being funny, but you know, trying to be funny, I guess, the whole time. So this definitely took a much more serious approach with an actual hero.
In fact,
and he sort of had some problems.
when Derek was still alive, he actually had a moratorium. He refused to cover Blank Man because he hated that movie so much.
Yeah. No, that's a weird one.
Yeah, absolutely. So what were some of the things that kind of jumped out to you rewatching this movie?
Watching this, I think, so if we're talking about the highlights, I guess I really probably enjoyed the performances a lot. I think that was something I took away. The story, I think the movie did have a lot of issues. I wouldn't say I enjoyed this fully. There was a lot of stuff I was very confused by. I had some pacing issues, and I think I got a little tired of the joke. Like, I couldn't get past that. You know, it was like, all right, it's a superhero with our powers. Now what? You know? And it sort of dried up pretty quickly for me, because it's not a long movie, but it felt super long for some reason. I had kind of a similar experience, and it really kind of surprised me. I mean, a lot of it is because, you know, James Gunn is obviously not a lot less experienced at this point, but that's true.
You watch his stuff now, and his stuff now is very tight. It's very well paced. Whereas this one, it drags. It drags a lot.
It drags, and it's like, so I think for me, like, I enjoyed Rainn Wilson and the Crimson Bolt and all that. Like, the action was actually pretty good. Obviously, you know, James Gunn, I was trying to get a feel for what James Gunn was before, you know, because this is probably one that probably has less studio interference. You know, because like Guardians of the Galaxy, I can tell has quite a bit. And I think, to be honest, it kind of works to his advantages sometimes, because I think it's just, you know, storytelling, and that's really good in the Guardians, in really both of them. And, you know, bigger budget and all that stuff. But this one was like, okay, James Gunn, you know, go for your life kind of thing. So you could sort of see some of the flaws and some of the stuff that's not really working out that well. Like, from what I could tell, James Gunn really likes to shock you, because this has a lot of, like, you know, like stuff from the start, like whether it's, you know, being peed on as a kid, or like you know, just showing hentai or whatever it was at the start, or like, you know, later on there's freaking like a few rape scenes and stuff like that. There's the drop of the N-bomb, and there's a lot of stuff that's just like, okay, this is pretty full on. And, you know, so, and I saw a little bit of that in because I've not actually seen Peacemaker, but I've seen the Suicide Squad movie.
Oh, Peacemaker is great. It's got some of that. It's got some of that black humor, but it's handled in a much better way. I'd say it's handled in a much more mature way. And I think a big part of it is because he was, you know, he got his start in Troma and, you know, low budget schlock filmmaking. And this was kind of when he was transitioning out of that, because he did this. And then after that came basically Guardians of the Galaxy, as far as like big stuff he was doing. But up until this, he had done, you know, these kinds of low budget horror films, basically.
Yeah, no, I'm quite aware of his. Haven't seen too much of them, but I know he used to be sort of a horror director, and it makes sense with some of his his shock, his I guess his appetite to shock the audience.
Yeah.
I'd put that because the other thing on the rewatch I wanted to see was how did this movie hold up? Because I did remember some of these scenes, not vividly, but I remember it was just a pretty controversial movie even for that time with some of the stuff they were doing. I don't know what you think, but I don't think this is a movie they would have remade, or they could remake in the same way in today's age. It's
probably not. It's pretty, it's got a lot of stuff that it's one of the things I think you can definitely compare it to Kick-Ass in and Mark Miller's comic book work is it's very much got that mentality of like things that a 12-year-old boy would find shocking and cool type of stuff.
Yeah. Yep. No, it definitely felt like that. It's like, okay, if you're a teenager, maybe back then you'd be like, oh my God, look at this. Wow, I can't believe you did that. Wow, this is crazy. But yeah, as a grown man, you kind of like, okay, cool, I've seen it.
Yeah.
Now what? And then it's like,
exactly.
What's next?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so he's puking now and he's seeing a face in it. Okay. We're seeing these tentacles come up and it's like, all right. I guess that style just sort of started really just, get down on me. And I was like, I'm getting a little tired of this whole thing. So that's sort of why I said maybe I kind of like that studio working in a studio environment, because he can be like, James, just chill out, dude. Let's actually focus on story a little bit here.
I think another big part of it is just the fact that he's gotten older, right? He's definitely matured a lot just as a person too. Because when I was 15 or 16, like I would have thought this was probably the greatest movie ever.
Yeah, true. It would have been pretty wild. But no, that's a really good point. Like I didn't really think about that sort of experience that he sort of gained throughout those years. And this is sort of a movie where he would have probably, I don't know if he admits it or not, but he would have probably learned a lot from this movie, just sort of what sort of worked, what didn't work. And a lot of that might have been the foundations for what we see now.
Yeah.
The lessons we've taken, you said, like, because Guardians of the Galaxy is really tight. It's I think Guardians of the Galaxy is probably up there in one of my favorite superhero movies, because it just was so well done. Especially the first one, and even the second one was really entertaining. But the first one was just like, we're diverting a little bit, but just in terms of just like, it wasn't a character I'd heard of similar to this. This is a made up character. But just the way that, he just presented everything, and his style, the music choices he uses to make this fun, engaging, movie with comedy and, good action, good emotion as well. I don't know, like this one, I felt like it was almost there, I felt like it was almost there, and it just didn't carry through all the way. Like I understood the dark humor part, and while the humor sometimes, lacked sometimes, I understood what he was trying to do with it, with the dark side of things. But it felt a little bit short. I don't know about how you felt, but like my emotional connection to Rainn Wilson was not so strong as it was in his movies now. Like with Guardians again, like you want the best for all those characters, whether it's Drax or Peter Quill or Gamora, whoever. In those movies, you want the best for them. But this one, I'm kind of like, I couldn't find myself attached to Crimson Bolt all that much.
Right.
But how about you, man?
I had the same reactions. I think a big part of it too is just like Rainn Wilson's kind of style of acting. He's got this very deadpan style, which which is fine if you've got if you're playing a supporting character like in The Office, but when you're kind of headlining a movie, I think it's a little bit harder to kind of sell people on it, especially a character like this who is not portrayed in the most sympathetic lights to begin with. So it's really hard. I found it really hard to relate to him as well. And I think comparing this to Peacemaker is a really useful exercise. And I know you said you hadn't seen it, but I definitely recommend watching it and checking it out, because you've got very similar premises on both hands. You've got this guy who's basically a violent psychopath trying to be a superhero. And another benefit is that, in Peacemaker, Gunn had 8-9 episodes. So he had a lot more time to kind of play with. But even still, even regardless of that extra time, like that show really does a good job of exploring like the ethics of being like a violent superhero and dealing with how that weighs on him. Whereas in this, I don't really feel that Frank ever really kind of learns any lessons necessarily. Like he still seems very much the same kind of deluded guy at the end that he was in the beginning.
Yeah, because I guess I don't really relate to him from I can't connect to him from an ethical point of view, like the good versus evil dilemma. Which again, sort of I mentioned sort of Darkman at the start. I thought that movie did a fantastic job of portraying that side of things. Going into the darkness and embracing your darker self, whatever that movie does. But this one kind of leaves you kind of like his motivations are he wants to save his wife. So from a personal, I didn't get that connection that much because I'm like, I don't know this relationship so much, and it turns out to be a really strange one.
Yeah.
As the end was just even more baffling, I felt. But then, the ethical dilemma, it was never really there. It was just like a madman going after vengeance, or trying to become more mad and more. I'm not sure if I don't know what the focus was kind of all over the place. I felt like I'm like, okay, is this a comedy? Because at times it'd be like, this is there for comedic purposes, and sometimes it works, sometimes it wouldn't. Like there's that. Yeah, there are some memorable scenes, like when he's I think he's like in line to watch a movie and someone butts in and he sees him and he goes and changes and comes back as the same guy.
Yeah.
The guy's like, he's like, I just saw you. I know who you are. But
right.
He doesn't
Well, the scene when he was changing in the car is what got a chuckle out of me. Like he's sitting there and he's in his tidy whities and the girl's coming like, Mommy, look at that. Another thing I thought was funny is that, the other thing that I really liked was when he takes the firecracker and he throws it as like a smoke bomb, and then he waits and then he runs into his car with the license plate still visible.
Yeah. And parts where he's like, he's running in, he drops something, and he comes back and picks it up, and it's like that. Some of that stuff was kind of relatable because, like, if any normal human being was a superhero, that's probably the kind of stupid stuff they would do. So that way it was relatable, but I think from a storyline and emotional point of view and the ethical point of view, you're kind of like, it's hard to sort of relate to this guy. And the Rainn Wilson point you bring up is pretty good because I was a huge Office fan, so I loved him in the Office. But you're right, he was a supporting character, and there were moments when you relate to him emotionally, quite a few. But even from like the start to end, he's not really the character that you focus on from that point of view. He's almost more comedic relief,
right?
For a lot of the seasons until they sort of build him up over like however many seasons they have, 10 or something like that. Until he becomes a focus a bit later on. But yeah, I mean, like, did you like him in this movie or did you like his style? Because he didn't really pick up much really after that. He sort of got trapped into that mold and never really broke out of it, I think
so, yeah. He didn't really do much for me in this movie, to be honest. Just because, like your point when you were saying that this is supposed to be a comedy movie, I'm watching it and another big drawback is I'm so familiar with James Gunn when he's really funny and like Peacemaker and Guardians of the Galaxy or Suicide Squad. So when I'm watching this, I'm just like, this is not that funny. Like it doesn't have a whole lot of humor going for it.
Yeah, it's either shock, like if you find that shock stuff funny, like
right.
If you're laughing at that stuff, maybe then you can get away with it. But like in general, just general comedy scenes, there's a few that we mentioned which I did like, but it's not like, doesn't carry you all the way. And I don't know if that's necessarily Rainn Wilson's fault. It might just been the character. It didn't really have that much to sort of work with at times. I felt like it was just like, the setups and stuff like that. I did like the when him and Elliot Page sort of got onto the same page. No pun intended there. But sort of when they sort of get on the same page, it become like this duo. I thought that I don't know what role she really had, except for just adding something to the mix, because it was starting to get really stale without anybody. So throwing her into that mix to be like, yep, just go crazy. And she was so off the wall. He was so off the wall. It was, a good breath of fresh air, I guess.
Yeah, I think actually Elliot Page got me a lot more interested when he came into the movie and he got more involved in it. Like at those points, I did become more invested. Just because, like, I'm not gonna. I don't know if I'd call him a better actor than Rainn Wilson, because I haven't seen Wilson enough stuff to really make that judgment.
Yeah.
But it's at least in this one, he had more to work with than Wilson did, I felt like. And that made him a lot more interesting because we got to see him a little bit in, he's got a normal life. He's this normal kid, or a young adult or whatever. And then we see him, basically be, and I'm watching this movie and I see what Gunn, I think I kind of get what Gunn's trying to go for. Whereas I was comparing it to Kick-Ass in my head, and where you could make the mistake of thinking like, oh, these are both about real world superheroes, but there's a difference in the type of character, because in Kick-Ass, he's a decent guy, right? He's a guy who's really trying to do the right thing. He's trying to be a good guy. He's trying to help people out. And but whereas in this one, it's a guy who is very deluded, right? It's very much like the dark side of that coin. And I think, and I get what Gunn's trying to do, right? I get the whole idea of like, you know, this guy's basically delusional, right? He thinks he had, you know, the hand of God touch his brain, voiced by Rob Zombie. Yeah. Funny enough.
Oh yeah, right.
And it's got this, there's this weird religious fundamentalist fervor that's kind of baked into his character, and he's, you know, he's basically turns him into a psychopath. And I thought that's an interesting idea, but I felt like they didn't really explore it enough. There wasn't enough meat on those bones, and I can see the idea that Gunn's going for, but he didn't get there for me.
Yeah, completely agree. I think they set that from the start. It's like, what he says, like, I've had 2 good moments in my life, and it's just, you know, the day when he pointed towards a grocery store to tell the cop that one of them is that, and the other one's the day he got married. So you know, they're pretty far apart. So he is definitely delusional, and again, that makes me again a bit harder. We talked about it a little bit before, relating to the character. It just was not there. Whereas when you talk about like Guardians, like you instantly, like from the intro scene, you see Peter Quill doing the dance, and you're like, who is this guy? Like, I need to know more, and let me follow this guy's journey, because this is just captivating. Whereas this just sort of draws down, and you're sort of in the mud. And yeah, there's a few scenes with, you know, the intervention of God and all that stuff, which was okay from a comedy point of view. Again, like, you know, that TV segments, I guess they were kind of funny. Where, like, again, if you like that kind of humor, maybe this is better. Like, if you like that sort of, you know, that kind of, I don't know what you call it. It's, to me, it's kind of cringy in a way, but you know, it's not it wasn't upsetting me, you know, like other sort of cringe stuff sort of does. But it's kind of just like whatever. But maybe if you like that stuff, it's better. But yes, it was interesting. I guess the reason I think I like Elliot, because you mentioned you sort of were invested, you liked Elliot Page a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think I do too, because yeah, again, he's a bit more relatable, right? Like, again, comic book store, you know, living you know, day to day with these books around him, and you know, kind of fantasizing about that life. And you sort of be like, oh, okay, I could, that makes sense to me. You know, like I could see that. And then, you know, the whole, I think there's some dilemma she had, right, where he was like, I think he was like, you know, when I'm in the suit, I'm not the same person. So when you're Crimson Bolt, you're not the same person. So therefore we could have a relationship as Bolty and Crimson Bolt. So
right. It's very much, it's that kind of like you're taking the secret identity to its illogical extreme, basically.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. And I did like that sort of stuff. So that did help to carry it through. So I think he was a real breath of fresh air to just come in and be like, hey, and just the performance was crazy, because, you know, it was, because where Rainn Wilson was kind of subdued a lot of time. Like, he has moments where he's going crazy, but a lot of time he's just weird, you know, as he sort of portrays it. But when Elliot Page comes in, he's kind of just like, I'm just gonna go absolutely crazy because I've been waiting for this moment, and it's sort of unhinged in a way.
Yeah. Well, I think that's another thing that I think makes Elliot's character Libby so much more interesting, is the fact that this is a person we can latch onto from a point of relatability, right? He's a guy who's working in a comic book store, someone who likes reading comic books, who hangs out with their friends. So there's those opening connections, and we can see how it's like, oh, Libby reads comic books. I read comic books too. This is someone I can relate to. And then we keep going, like, oh, wait a minute. Whoa. But there's that intro point there with I keep wanting to say Dwight. But with Frank, because he basically is Dwight, like you said.
He is.
But with Frank, there's no like intro point. Like, just from the start, I'm just like, this guy is just really weird and off-putting, and I have no way to connect to him.
Yeah. Definitely. It's a whole, the premise is kind of strange as well. Just like, even with Kevin Bacon, as much as I liked him, I wish even that was explored a bit better. Like, he kidnaps Dwight's now I'm saying Dwight. He kidnaps Crimson Bolt's wife, And it's kind of like I was like, in the movie, like it didn't have to go that much, but it's kind of like, why? Like, I didn't have much of a relationship, but like she just drugs her up and uses her, I guess, for exploitation, which is kind of disturbing as well.
You know what I think would have worked a lot better is if Jacques, who's Kevin Bacon's character, was not a bad guy. Like it's just this guy that she leaves Frank for, and then Frank builds up this whole fantasy about him as like a fight between good and evil in his mind. I think that would have sold the ideas behind this movie a whole lot more. But as it stands, it is just kind of like, wait a minute, this is when you get to the point, it's like, oh, like there are some points because it's. Kevin Bacon does a good job of playing this guy. He's like, he comes over, he's like having eggs with him, and he's complimenting him. And when Frank comes to him and Jacques like, look, man, I was trying to be nice to you. He's got a point. And I wish they had stuck with that instead of going to the point of, okay, yeah, Jacques actually is a bad guy and Frank is somewhat justified in what he's doing.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I think that would have been good. It would have added that element of mystery because there's not much. Yeah, there's no mystery in this movie at all. No. It's pretty straightforward. That would have done something to make it a bit more dynamic and turn something into the mix. Interestingly enough, I think I read that it was meant to be Jean-Claude Van Damme that was meant to play Kevin Bacon's role, which is
that would have made it even less relatable. Like, I mean, I think Kevin Bacon does a good job of making that character somewhat appealing. I don't think Van Damme could have done the same thing.
I have no idea what they would have done with Van Damme. It would have. I guess the only benefit you would have had is maybe you'd have a good action scene or something like that. But I kind of like Rainn Wilson's not going to be able to do martial arts and like do fight choreography and stuff like that. So Van Damme, I love Van Damme, but his acting chops are not. Was there, especially back then. He became a better actor actually during his career, but back then he was definitely more around for his splits and roundhouse kicks and stuff like that. He wasn't really an actor. So I did like Kevin. I did like Kevin Bacon, but you're right. It would have been better if it was a bit more dynamic. I think it was kind of just it was like one dimensional, stock standard, baddie, I guess. And his entourage was pretty funny. Like I like seeing I like seeing his brother Sean Gunn in there, and
Michael Rooker.
Michael Rooker. Yeah, these guys that we're sort of familiar with. But one thing I want to ask you about is how do you feel about the whole so James Gunn with his his extreme, I guess, violence, like especially I don't know if you can say like back then was this more than it is now. More of a shock factor because 2010 it wasn't so I don't know if it's so much, but like he really goes off the wall with his violence sometimes. Like we really see faces being torn in half and like blood spilling everywhere. Doesn't hold back, man, with this stuff. But how did you think about that stuff? Did you enjoy it?
I didn't really give it much thought, to be honest. I thought it was fine for this movie because the whole idea is you're trying to portray what this kind of stuff would actually look like in the real world. So I thought it worked. Like because in reality, if you hit someone with a pipe wrench, like that's a really that's going to cause some damage. It's not like in most superhero movies you see like these guys running around with like these blunt weapons, and it's just like they knock them and it just knocks the guy out. But otherwise, there's like no scar or anything like that. But if you hit that's a big chunk of metal. Like if you hit someone in the head with that, that's probably going to split their skull open.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. Yeah, it's interesting weapon, and it's like the blood spills and splatters out. It's kind of that way. So I didn't mind it too much, but I think it's just it kind of wore me down at some point. And I found that a little bit with James Gunn's Suicide Squad, the recent one that he did.
Yeah.
Like that same aspect, it was kind of like, okay, like it starts off crazy, and then after that, it's like we're gonna maintain the same tone. So it doesn't pick up or go down. It's like just, it's just one level. Which this sort of remind me of two. Like I guess it gets a little bit because at the side it's more just like, him with the wrench or hand to hand, and then he has weapons that just go on. But the end action scene kind of like it even felt like it was just dragging. Like it didn't really feel like that exciting. I was like, all right, cool. Even though you're having faces blown off and him slowly killing people, and I think what he sends like a like a what's it called, like a shard through Kevin Bacon's nuts or something like that. Like but it's kind of just like, all right, like it didn't really do much for me at that point either.
No, I felt the same thing. The ending scene didn't really do a whole lot for me. I was by that point, I think I was pretty much just kind of like checked out of the movie, and I was just kind of like, all right, yeah, it's going to be over soon. And because there's a lot of interesting ideas in here, especially the whole idea of, how the public reacts to Crimson Bolt. I thought was another thing that there's an interesting idea there, right? The fact that he is this psychopath, but then, and at first people react to him in horror, but then later when it comes out these were, bad people, then people start react. I thought there's something in there where you can talk about how how black and white the public views things. And I thought there's a lot of room to explore that kind of stuff. But again, we're not getting enough meat on those bones.
No, that's a really good one. Like I thought that could have been explored, like how the relationship of the media changes as you sort of progress and sort of what you do and how your actions define. Are you a good guy? Is the shades of gray? Is it black and white? Are you universally loved? There's all these questions you could have sort of explored, but it's like 2 scenes. I think they have newscasts.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, this is interesting, but what else?
Right. They're like, okay, well, we did that. Now we got to move on. It's these ideas that Gunn has, but he just doesn't give them enough time to really explore them. And each of those ideas can be a movie in its own right. Like you could do a whole movie just about like the people reacting to a violent superhero and like how that comment, like, I don't know, following a reporter or someone or a police officer who's investigating a violent superhero. And there's a lot of stuff you can explore with like media reaction, all that, which is an interesting idea. And I find these small ideas that Gunn just kind of touches on to be far more interesting than the actual story of this movie. And I'm just like, no, just, I don't care about Frank. Go back to this other stuff. This other stuff is a lot more interesting. I want you to explore this.
Definitely right.
Because as it stands, and I think a big part of it is just Rainn Wilson. Again, like we said, I just don't think he's charismatic enough of an actor to really kind of, because this movie, and again, I'm going back to comparing it to Peacemaker. One of the reasons Peacemaker works is because John Cena is such a charismatic actor. So even when he's a psychopath, you still enjoy watching him. And so it makes it a little bit easier to stomach it. With Rainn Wilson, I'm not interested enough in him. He doesn't grab my attention enough for me to be really not saying you should have had a John Cena in this role, but someone who's got a little bit more, even if you would switch it, you had Elliot Page being the lead actor here. I think he would have a lot more charisma to carry it through.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think it's the screen presence isn't really there, I feel like, from Rainn Wilson. It's kind of like even if I think of Dwight, he's great in a cartoonish way, but to be a lead actor, that's why they sort of have Michael Scott,
Steve Carell.
For his name for a second. Steve Carell and John Krasinski, they're sort of more the characters you actually relate to because they can have a bit more charisma. But Rainn Wilson's more like, it's kind of like, again, in The Office, it's like one joke, repeat that over and over again, and doesn't go further. So I do like him in a side, comic relief kind of character. I think there he works really well in a limited capacity. But yeah, there are some flaws, and that's probably why his career didn't pick up as much as it probably could have. Because it's just like
also Nathan Fillion too is another one that you could have. In fact, you could have switched Rainn Wilson and Nathan Fillion's characters, and I think it would have. And I think it would have worked a lot better because Nathan Fillion has that kind of like everyman charisma, and I think he would have been able to work really well in this. Whereas Rainn Wilson, I think if he was playing that stoic Bible man-esque character, would have made a lot more sense. I think he would have been able to do that. He would have been able to do that much better, and also still sell the whole kind of tongue-in-cheek aspect of it.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I wonder if they were to remake this movie, how they would sort of approach that, because I do think some of those changes would have helped the movie out in general. It's interesting. But what do you think about the ending, man? Like the ending for me was super confusing. I was kind of like, I didn't know what to even make of it. I was like, okay, because it's kind of like what happened. So he saves her to, help her get back her life, and then she marries somebody else. I was kind of like, I get it. It's meant to be dark. He's not. I guess he has found life beyond, her and all that stuff, and that's all good. It's kind of just like, I guess.
my feeling is like it's this interesting idea, and again, we're touching on the aspect of Frank is this damaged guy. He's this guy who doesn't quite see the world as it really is. So he's not able to, and I get what we're trying to do here, but again, it just doesn't quite sell it. Like,
Yeah.
because I mean, it makes total sense because the whole, and again, this is another idea that's not really explored fully, is the fact that Sarah's just kind of using him to get over her addiction, right? She's just kind of like jumping from one thing to the next. So at the end, it makes sense that she would, when she recovers, she would leave him behind and move on to something, you know, more normal. But again, the movie just, there's that idea there, but it just doesn't quite sell it enough.
Again, I think it's like, I guess it's kind of disappointing because you don't really get that character development from him as well, right? It's kind of like he's just stuck in the same place that he was at the start. Hasn't really moved on from that. So again, I guess you're not invested in his character that much, so it doesn't let you down all that much because like I don't really care about him anyway. But a good movie would have actually made you, you know, invest in him and see his journey, whether it's good or bad. You know, it's not like you, I guess with character development, you want to see it go somewhere. I guess there's a little bit because yes, he has more, you know, more great moments in his life or whatever it is.
Well, here's another thing I think would have made it a lot better because John C. Reilly was actually Gunn's top choice for Frank. And I think that would have been a much more interesting choice. But which is weird because he says that Reilly at the time wasn't considered a big enough star for the film to get made. So I'm not sure how Rainn Wilson would be considered a bigger star because especially at that time, I definitely don't think he would have been.
2010, it would have been early days of The Office, so I'm surprised that's.
Yeah,
I'm surprised they thought Rainn Wilson was big enough.
Yeah, that's strange.
Coming from TV, especially like you know, The Office was obviously huge, but
Reilly had at least some film stuff to his name at that point. Like he was in Talladega Nights and some other stuff. I think Step Brothers started to come out by that point too. Oh, and Chicago. I think that was also out at that time too.
Yeah.
So he had some, you know, he had some pretty decent roles, and as not only a comedy actor but also a serious actor. Like he had been in, you know, he had been in Boogie Nights. So yeah, that's weird that they thought he wasn't a big enough name to really kind of carry this movie.
I don't know if there was some, because I know that in the trivia it said something like, I think Rainn Wilson found out about this movie through James Gunn's ex-wife Jenna Fisher, who was on The Office, who plays Pam. So I don't know if that played into it at all. Like it just sort of came across his desk, and they're like, "Oh, you know, do my pal a favor or something like that." I don't know. Something like that might have been involved. To give Dwight a break into
So it says that so he had been working on it since 2002. So at that point, he had there you go. You know, Reilly wasn't a big enough name, and so he had put it on the back burner. But then after Slither, then Jenna Fisher encouraged him to go through with it, and recommended Rainn Wilson at that point. So I guess things had changed by that point. So that makes a little bit more sense. Still, I think
so. He was working on this since 2002.
Yeah.
Oh man, that makes me kind of feel disappointed. He had all that time, and he,
well, I mean, he wasn't exactly working on it the whole time because he had done the specials, and then he had, you know, the Dawn of the Dead remake, and then, you know, directing Slither, and then it was after that point that he was encouraged to go back to this. So I think it's just kind of something he dusted off, but probably didn't spend as much time revising it as he probably should have.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way because all the stuff you talked about with some of these, you know, concepts on the edges. If they were explored more, I think if more time was given to the script and, you know, maybe, you know, changing some things around, you know, a little bit, or putting more emphasis on some of those things, I think it might have been more interesting. But I think it was just like, look, let's just get this out.
Yeah.
You know? And I think there's definitely something that happened behind the scenes with this movie. Because I think with these movies now, you can tell there's definitely a good effort to make sure everything makes sense, and it's you know, it's an engaging storyline from start to finish. I don't feel bored watching his movies, which is weird in this one because I got bored. Like, I think it was like halfway through, I was like, I'm kind of getting bored here. And the Elliot Page came, and I was like, all right, there's a little bit of life here, but it wasn't really enough for me to really enjoy the movie, all that much.
No, I felt exactly the same way. It's there's not some interesting ideas, but just not enough to really keep my attention as much as James Gunn usually is able to. And I think the fact that he was working on this since 2002 does explain a lot, because even if you look at Dawn of the Dead, like that's even a much tighter script than this is. And so I think it's just like I don't think he spent enough time on this script that he should have, because it wasn't really there for me.
I don't know if it was because it has definitely like a TV feel to it, right? Like I don't think anybody would have gone to see this in the cinema, or if they did, it would have been very few people, because it's definitely a movie you watch at home, on DVD.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think it was a much bigger release on digital, actually, I believe.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, it opened in 11 theaters and made about just under 47,000. But then when it was on VOD, it made, and since 2011, as of 2011, it made 1.5 million on DVD and Blu-ray sales.
Okay.
And
so it picked up afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, it was I don't know if it actually ended up being, it was anticipated to be the most successful VOD film for IFC at the time. I'm not sure if it actually ended up being like that, but that was what it says. It was anticipated to, but it did make almost its budget back through DVD and Blu-ray, because it had a budget of 2.5 million. Yeah,
the cast, I'm guessing, is quite high, and I get a bit of prosthetic CGI kind of stuff, or however they did it.
Well, I mean, they got some interesting names. They got some big names in this cast. I mean, getting Liv Tyler, Kevin Bacon, Nathan Fillion, Elliot Page, Michael Rooker, Rob Zombie coming in to play the voice of God. I mean, the cast is probably where most of the budget for this movie went.
I think so, yeah. And this is definitely a movie that if it came out like, if it was to come out on like Netflix, like one of their releases, I'm sure it'll get like a pretty decent run for a week or two or something like that. Because it's definitely the kind of movie that back in like, when we were sort of growing up, it would have been the, Friday night TV movie, or like Saturday morning or like Saturday afternoon movie or something like that you chuck on a channel and just watch. So yeah, it's definitely was like, maybe James Gunn just got to a point where he's like, all right, this is good enough. Get out there. It'll be enough for me to sort of move on with this project, because I really didn't want to linger on for too long, because he has the Guardian stuff to do and sort of bigger projects coming up.
Also, there's one other thing I wanted to mention about this. Did you ever see the movie Brightburn?
I have not seen Brightburn, but I've heard about that movie.
Yeah, Brightburn is
good, right?
It's good. It's a superhero horror film. It's basically the Superman story, but he gets his powers early, and he becomes a psychopath, basically. What happens when you give all this power to a kid who has to deal with bullying and all that kind of stuff. It's a really good movie. But it's also, there's a mid-credit scene where there's a reference to where Rainn Wilson actually reprises his role as the Crimson Bolt. So this movie and Brightburn exist in the same universe. So Rainn Wilson there's a photograph of the Crimson Bolt in there. So so there's that little bit of there's this. And also, when we had talked about Brightburn, I talked about this with the original co-host Derek. He had talked about how when we were watching Brightburn, and then after that we watched Chronicle, and he said you could actually fit Chronicle into that same universe too.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so a bit of multiverse stuff going on there, I guess. That's interesting. And I'm definitely going to check out Brightburn. That sounds awesome.
Brightburn is definitely worth the watch. It's much better than this. It grabbed my attention much better than this. And James Gunn produced that, so he didn't write it. He didn't write it or direct it, but he did produce it. His brothers wrote it, I believe.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah. Any other final things to mention about Super?
No, not really. I think we covered it off pretty well. So overall, I guess my final statement would be that I think it's an okay movie. Probably not a movie I'm going to watch ever again. I think at this point, because I think I've seen it twice now, and I think the rewatch probably was not any better than the original watch. Because the original watch would have been ages ago, but obviously I didn't remember it too well back then, and I'm not going to. It doesn't really leave you with too much memory. I did want to ask you though, where would you rank this in terms of the other movies we talked about before in the same sort of genre, with the Blank Mans and the I wouldn't say Mystery Men, because you're right, that is a bit different. It's like regular people in a superhero world, but Kick-Ass and all the sequels. Where would this sort of sit?
So it's definitely better than Blank Man. I would say that. Kick-Ass would be right at the top. Kick-Ass 2, because I was really disappointed with Kick-Ass 2. I'm not sure if I'd rank. I got to watch Kick-Ass 2 again to kind of judge it. I'm not sure if I'd put this above or below Kick-Ass 2, but somewhere along the same lines as Kick-Ass 2, I'd say. So like you'd have Kick-Ass way at the top, and then there's this really big drop off, and then you've got these other three.
I definitely agree. I think I'm probably on the same boat as you. Kick-Ass is like way above. I think Kick-Ass did a great job. Kick-Ass was a good movie. That first one, it explored this thing we talked about. Had Nicolas Cage in for like a nice little cameo, which was really impactful. I think this movie liked that dynamic. Like I just remember Nick Cage in that being so dynamic, and because he's such a great actor, he can do that. This movie sort of had a lot of actors, but they weren't put in positions to do much. Like the only person that was probably Rainn Wilson, and he didn't have the range to do it. So yeah, we talked about a lot of other people that could have played that role. I think it liked that as well. Like Elliot Page does a great try for that. You know, I thought he was really good in roles, but again, it's a very limited role, and it's there's some complexities, but not that much.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think Kick-Ass benefited from you had these big name actors playing these really eccentric characters. So you had Nick Cage doing like basically a psychotic Adam West in that movie, which was great. It worked perfectly for that. But you had Mark Strong, who's also this, playing this very over the top crime lord. And but you've got Aaron Taylor Johnson, who's very anchored. He's a very anchored character throughout that whole movie, and it really kind of helps pull you through that movie. And these other guys are there, and their big personalities are entertaining to watch, but they never really distract you from the central story. This, you've got an uninspiring lead who doesn't grab your attention enough, and then you've got these big name actors, but they're not eccentric enough to make up for that. So it doesn't work enough on either one of those levels. And you're right. You had the potential. You had Kevin Bacon there. You had Nathan Fillion there. But the only one who really shines through is Elliot Page.
Yeah, I guess they're all one-dimensional. That's the thing, right? It's like Kevin Bacon, sucks and a bad guy. Like Nathan Fillion, like comedic relief, or something like that, with not much of a role.
Well, so I mean, you even have like Michael Rooker in there, who would usually play that kind of role, but he's just not. No,
exactly right. Yeah, I don't want to watch Blank Man again just because I don't want to put myself through that. But I would question whether this is above or below Blank Man. I mean, Blank Man is just Blank Man because it's Damon Wayans. If you like that style of humor, you might love it. But I don't like that style of his humor all that much. So it's kind of something like this. Like,
I mean, if I was comparing this, the first time I watched Blank Man, I would say I laughed more at that than I did at this. But the first time I watched Blank Man, I was like, 10 maybe. So it's a very different situation.
Yep. I don't want to put this probably neck and neck with Blank Man. I can't remember Kick-Ass 2 all that much either. I do think it was definitely a step down from Kick-Ass 1.
Oh, it was, massively.
Yeah, massive step down. Yeah. Which is why I didn't continue the franchise. It was just, let's do one more, get the money, and then walk away from it.
Pretty much it after that. All right, Amit, want to tell people where they can find you and your podcast?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, firstly, man, thanks so much for having me on. I really enjoyed talking about this movie. Really appreciate it. Great to have this conversation about this weird movie, I would say. So that was great. But yeah, so the podcast is just D54. Yep, just Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I think we're on Instagram as well. Just D54. I think it's pod or something like that. Just type in D54. Should come up at this point.
We'll have the link in the show notes so people can check those out.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. But I think speaking of superhero movies, I think our next movie we're releasing is going to be the new Schwarzenegger movie.
Okay.
What is that? The Samaritan?
Oh, that's Stallone.
Stallone movie. Yeah. So there's a little tie-in for superhero lovers there. That's I haven't actually seen it yet. So
this episode's actually gonna be coming out in like December or so. So by the time this episode's out, then that should definitely be already on your feed.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
Okay. Cool. All right, great. Well, thanks for coming on, and thanks for so little behind the scenes stuff. You guys don't realize this, but this has actually taken like 3 tries to get Amit on the show because we had a bunch of different stuff pop up in my life. So thanks for being so understanding and being willing to reschedule. After the second time, it's like, oh man, he's not going to come on the show now. But no, you were.
No, it's all good. It's I understand, life can get in the way at times, so don't worry about that at all.
Yeah, but thanks for coming on. Great to have you on. And yeah, anytime you want to come on back, you're more than welcome to.
Awesome, man. No, looking forward to it.
Okay. All right. And that does it for this episode of Superhero Cinephiles. Superherocinephiles.com is the website, and we are Super Cinema Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And remember, if you subscribe to our Patreon for as little as $1 a month, you get these episodes a week in advance, and you also get the bonus Superhero Cinephiles Book Club show where we talk about comics and all that fun stuff. Thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you next time. If you enjoy the Superhero Cinephiles, then you'll also love my companion podcast, the Superhero Cinephiles Book Club. All my Patreon subscribers get access to this exclusive podcast where I review superhero comics and graphic novels. Not sure what comics you want to read next or what you should dive into? I've got you covered on that. I'll be doing reviews, recommendations, and also talking to you about useful entry points if you're interested in reading some comics but don't know where you should start. Plus, you'll get access to all episodes of the main show a week before everyone else. On all of this for as little as just $1 a month. All you have to do is go to patreon.com/supercinemapod and you can sign up at any subscription amount to get started. Thanks so much for your support, and please don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. And as always, good night, good evening. God bless.